Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. As if you're not already bored of me, too much content. Not enough content. In fact, I'm super excited to present some more content to you, which is a chat with Ada Wordsworth, who, as far as I understand it, does some incredible work in Ukraine, presently not in Ukraine, and she'll explain, how it all works with what she's doing and how she goes about doing it. But thank you very much, Ada. You might have heard her on Ukraine the latest. I think I've seen you on Silicon Curtain with my friend Jonathan Fink. So that was cool. That was like, oh, I'm due to have a chat to you. So that's really cool. Anyway, sorry, enough waffling. Ada, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Brilliant. I guess the first place to start with you, before we actually get to talking to the audience about kind of what HARPP is and what is the work that you do, it might be quite nice for people to understand who you are in terms of how you came to be interested in, well, actually initially Russia, then Ukraine, and your background there, and how you switched from sort of Russia to Ukraine.
Yeah, so I was always very interested in Russia, kind of very interested in Russian literature, Russian politics, very engaged by it. And so for my undergraduate, I studied Russian at university, and continued to be very invested in it. Did a year abroad in Moscow, and then started my master's September 2021 in Slavonic studies, but still focused on Russia. And then when the full-scale invasion started, it just kind of broke something for me. I was 2/3 or halfway through my master's. I was meant to be writing a dissertation about Russian literature, and on the morning of the 24th, I went to a protest against the war at Downing Street, and then went back home to try and keep working on my dissertation, and realized that I just couldn't do it. And so decided that if I couldn't do that, I may as well try and do something useful with the skills I'd gained from studying Russia, namely that I'd learned to speak Russian. And so I thought, okay, I can use that. And so I just booked a flight to the Polish-Ukrainian border and went out with the intention of going out for 6 weeks. And it was just before my Easter holidays. And so I was okay, miss a couple of weeks of uni and then be there for the Easter holidays and then come back and go back to my normal life. But did not work out like that. Stayed for was on the border, then moved into Kharkiv a couple of months later. Ended up suspending my studies for a year, and then came back and switched my whole degree to Ukrainian and ended up completing the master's in Ukrainian instead.
That's an incredible switch there. What was it about the war? What was it that spoke to you so morally about the war that made you make those quite big choices?
I guess part of it was I had been insisting for months that the war wouldn't happen, and to any.
And were you listening closely about that? Was
Yeah.
this something you were very cognizant of as it was happening in the build-up?
Yeah, as the build-up was happening, I was reading everything about it, and I was so convinced it wouldn't happen. Mostly because, in hindsight, I think because I was in denial. I didn't want to accept that this could happen. Partly out of completely selfish reasons. I knew that if this happened, this would, destroy the career that I was trying to build. And so I was like, no, it just won't happen. Can't accept that this will happen. And then when it did happen, I was so overwhelmed with guilt and shame for being so in denial of it. And I felt like I had to kind of do something to make that right, to make right that I had told so many people that it wouldn't happen, that I had been so convinced it wouldn't. I think also I felt very complicated about the fact that the Russia that I truly believed did exist and could exist, which was the Russia of the opposition, the Russia of, environment. Most of my friends in Russia were environmental activists and opposition activists. And I think when I realized, and so I really believed in a future for Russia and that there was a Russia beyond Putin. And once the war started and the protests kind of started and then petered away so quickly, there was also a sense that it was time to that I'd just been wrong, that there was no point in continuing to try and back this horse. I know other people who would disagree with that, people who were in the same field as me prior to the war, who still very much believe that there is a future for a democratic Russia in the short term, but I very much gave up on that at that point.
I find this fascinating. I know we haven't even talked about your charity work, but I think psychology is so important because it explains why all of us do what we do, right? And if we don't understand psychology, we just don't understand each other and motivations. And I think for you to be someone that is willing to change your mind based on evidence is actually something we don't always see so readily from people. And to go, do you know what is wrong about this? And I need to rejig my entire thought processes, my entire appraisal of what Russia is. There's talk about from people who are involved in kind of Russia studies or Slavonic studies even, that I've heard criticisms that there's too much of a Russian focus, and in fact there's this idea that Russia is seen too much with rose-tinted glasses in terms of history. Is that something that you that accords with what you've experienced?
Yeah, very much so. And I think now I look back at my education. I've had a very good education. I've been taught by wonderful people. And this isn't in any way a criticism of them as individuals, but I look at the way that, Russian courses are structured and Slavonic studies courses are structured, and the imperial narratives which inevitably weave their way through them. The things that I look now at the things that I was ignorant of 2 years ago with so much shock. The extent to which I didn't understand the war in Donbass, I didn't understand the war in Crimea, despite having specialized in Russian and post-Soviet politics in my undergraduate. I had no clear sense of that.
Wow.
And it just wasn't. I felt a lot of shame for that for a long time. And then there was a point where I was like, okay, but I was an undergraduate, and it was just, no one really explained it to me. And that was kind of a job of the lecturers to explain that. And it does worry me now when I meet undergraduates in Russian who are studying it now, that they seem to be having the same experience that I had, that they're still not being taught Russia in a really decolonial way.
Yeah,
And
I've heard that criticism exactly that from many analysts saying that this needs to be addressed.
yeah, and I was recently spent some time in Tbilisi and
Which is
met,
Georgia, for those.
which is Georgia,
Yeah.
and which is 20% of Georgia is currently occupied by Russia after the 2008 war with Russia, and met multiple British undergraduate students who were there to study Russian, which is in itself so problematic. Georgians do not speak Russian. Georgians speak Georgian. It's not even like Ukraine where there are a lot of bilingual people. Georgians are very, very anti-speaking Russian. If you go to Georgia to speak Russian, you're speaking Russian with the Russian expat community. But that in itself is separating you from the Georgian community and adding to this segregation that is increasingly becoming apparent in Georgia. There are all these, it's a whole massive conversation of its own, but there are so many complexities with the Russian language in Georgia, and British students are just being sent there to speak Russian with no further conversation about what the colonial complexities around that are.
Because
Um,
it's such a fascinating country anyway, because of just presently geopolitically, because
yeah,
the ruling party, Georgia Dream, got in on a kind of pro-European stance as a kind of appeasing reflecting the general population. But since they've been in power, they've really gone hard towards Russia, and
yeah,
then the general population in Georgia is very anti-Russian, broadly speaking, as far as I can work out. And the
yeah,
largest contingent of foreign volunteer fighters that have died has come from Russia, and so there's a lot of feeling in Georgia publicly that differs from the political party, and that must be so frustrating. I know it's a completely different subject.
yeah. No, but it's a fascinating one, and I think that it's a very, it was a fascinating time to be in Georgia and to see that play out. I was there when Georgia got EU candidate status, I think 2
Yeah.
weeks ago. maybe 3 weeks ago, but very recently. And there were massive street parties across the city, completely in contrast with the government, who have been actively against the EU at every step of the way and wanting to move towards Russia. And so it was kind of wonderful to be somewhere where there was a real victory for the people against this authoritarian regime. And so, yeah, I kind of feel like if you're going to go to Georgia, it's good to try and learn some Georgian. Like, there's enough fascinating stuff going on there to make it very much worth learning Georgian. You don't need to move there to learn Russian. You probably won't learn very good Russian there either, given none of the general population are speaking it. It just happens to was under Russian control once.
I was speaking to my friends, a couple of my friends yesterday, and Georgia came up for some weird reason. I was like, I'm fairly sure that it was something. Georgia and wine came up. I was like, you do realize I think Georgia is the first place in the world that had wine? Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah.
Good, because I had this one of these facts in my head, and I was like, yeah, this is of course true. And I was like, is it? I have got no idea. Oh, cool. Okay, so anyway, back to where you were in terms of, right, okay, so you were studying, you were doing your masters. So then like, how did you end up in Ukraine doing what you're doing off and on, and what is it that you do?
Yeah, so I initially flew to the Polish-Ukrainian border, and went to volunteer at the train station, where most refugees were coming through. I had the very naive idea that I would kind of fly out, find a big kind of Oxfam Save the Children tent, go in, say, hi, I speak Russian and English. Can I be of any assistance to you? Got there, and none of these big charities were present. It was an entirely kind of grassroots response by the local Polish community, who were, doing amazing work. But there was obviously like various language barriers. Polish is very similar to Ukrainian. A lot of the refugees who were coming through were Russian speaking. It was, there was a lot of complicated language dynamics going on. And Polish and Ukrainian are similar, but they're not necessarily that similar to all dialects of Ukrainian, blah, blah, blah. And so I put out a kind of request on social media. I sent out an email basically asking other Ukrainian and Russian speakers from the UK to please come out and join, because there were about 50,000 refugees coming through a day. And on the first day I was there were only 5 of us in the train station who spoke either Ukrainian or Russian. And it was just a complete nightmare, kind of hell on earth. And luckily the call out worked and people did start coming out. And so we formed a kind of little community of Brits and Americans with various language skills, just helping out, doing what we could, fundraising, getting people hotel rooms, getting people train tickets for their onward travel, helping as much as we could. We then decided, simultaneously, we were meeting a lot of refugees from Kharkiv, and we're starting to raise money separately for Kharkiv, which we were sending to a volunteer organization there we'd been put in touch with. Again, very grassroots, just a group of friends who were driving supplies around the city while it was kind of surrounded by three sides at the start of the war. Eventually, we basically raised too much money and got slightly freaked out by it and thought, okay, we need to solidify this in some way, because we can't just have this money moving through our bank accounts. And also, this war is clearly not going to end anytime soon. And so we need to make this was a kind of group of 3 or 4 of us. We're like, okay, we're clearly in this for the long term. And so we need to solidify this. And so we founded HARPP, the Kharkiv and Przemysl project. Sorry,
at the beginning, can you say what it stands for again?
Yeah, the Kharkiv and Przemysl project. So we were operating in Kharkiv and in Przemysl on the border. For the next few months, we were continuing to do that, and just providing humanitarian aid and ambulances and various other support in Kharkiv, and having this volunteer community on the border. Kharkiv was then liberated in September 2022, at which point I knew that I wanted to move into reconstruction. That had always been the thing that I felt was most important. Well,
why is that?
Because it was something really long term. When we had been giving out food to people, it had always just felt so depressing because you're giving people some food that they're going to eat within the week,
Interesting.
and it's just going to end. When actually, what it was actually one elderly woman said to us when we went around and gave her a food package. She said, "Thanks for this, but it's not going to help me survive the winter when I have no windows."
Right.
And seemed like a fair point. And we had initially decided that we couldn't do reconstruction because Kharkiv was still, the oblast was still partially occupied. There was still a lot of fighting going on. But once it was liberated, it felt like it was possible. And so we kind of waited a month doing our research. And after it had been quiet for a month and seemed like Ukraine had been successful, then we started working on the home repairs scheme. And since then, it's kind of just continued and kept growing. And so like this, our website's actually out of date. I need to update it. It's now 670 homes repaired, and hopefully by the end of next month will be even more. And then 3 hospital clinics and a care home as well. And so that's basically what we do now. And I'm mostly based in Ukraine. I haven't been the past couple of months. Took a break and went to Georgia for some detoxing. Now in the UK seeing family, and then going back next week for the next few months.
There's so much just in the very kind of relatively little that you told me. There's still so much I want to just talk to you about, the things that you're saying that are like, oh, that's really interesting. Like one of the things, but I get, well, well, no, now's probably the right time because you just mentioned it. Although you haven't really told us exactly what you do as a charity, and the you know the precise details of the work that you do. We'll come on to that. But you talk about needing to detox. Is this like, is this a really stressful thing for anyone in your position to do? And how is it stressful, and what are the challenges psychologically for you?
I think that seeing that level of destruction that you have in the villages where I work is not healthy for anyone. It's very it's very disturbing seeing that level of destruction and speaking to people about these experiences. It really gets to you. It really, it does something to you. And yeah, there are other things, it's upsetting to be around shelling and all of that, is definitely a part of it. But predominantly, I would say the speaking to people who lived under occupation, and feeling the sort of endless bleakness of it, especially at the moment when people don't really have as much hope as they did a year ago.
That's interesting. So is that something you've really experienced, that actually the longer the war goes on, the more kind of bleak people feel?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that last winter in Kharkiv, you had no electricity, you had no heating, you had no water half the time. It was pretty much everything was closed, but there was a really positive atmosphere a lot of the time because the oblast had just been liberated and people felt like the end of the war was in sight. I was last in Kharkiv 6 weeks ago, and there's electricity, there are street lights, there's hot water, there's gas, there's new bars opening, new restaurants opening. The city is very much alive, and the atmosphere is still 50 times worse than it was a year ago because people are
Wow.
just so tired, and so many more people, how many thousands, tens of thousands of people have died in the last year, how many more people have lost a loved one in the last year. And there's still a belief in victory, but there's also an understanding that a lot more people are going to lose their lives, lose their loved ones before that victory comes about. And that's taken, I think, a while for people to accept, and now people are accepting it. And
Are people more positive or negative in the rural areas than in the cities? Is there a difference in psychology there?
I think the difference, I guess, is that in the rural areas, at least where I work in, the main difference between them and Kharkiv is that they were often under occupation, whereas Kharkiv never was. And so they have a lot of those villages are also still very cut off, and so a lot of them still don't have electricity, a lot of them still don't have phone signal. still don't have gas or anything, and so they're still very isolated. And so I guess they have a slightly different understanding of the war because they're in a slight information vacuum. People aren't getting access to the news, and also I guess in the villages where they do have electricity and this stuff has been provided again, they have a different focus. They have a focus on rebuilding the village because the damage in villages tends to be a lot more than the damage in city. You know, Kharkiv has seen a lot of destruction, but it is nothing compared to the villages around it, which are kind of up to 90% destroyed. And so I guess that keeps people busy. And so people aren't maybe talking about the war as much because they're more focused on the rebuild, the kind of bare minimum rebuilding that needs to be done for them to keep living there.
And I'm just going to bring up a map actually, because it might be useful for people to kind of get an understanding of where you are presently sort of working. So bear with me 2 ticks. So do you just in the meantime, do you want to just then give us an indication of the sort of work that you're doing, how you go about arranging to do that? Or I guess if we go back to the beginning, how did you then start? Sorry, continue the story of how you started up the charity.
Yeah, so we had the charity set up. We were doing the work on the border and the humanitarian stuff in Kharkiv, but when we decided to move to reconstruction, I basically set up a Google form for people in the Kharkiv in Kharkiv Oblast who wanted home repairs, and we sent it to a couple of Telegram channels, and got some requests from people. Still had no idea what we were doing really. Like we had some money. We had the money and the desire, but didn't have any idea how to go about it. Just set up a form and sent a message to some Telegram channels saying, you know, we can help with, we can't rebuild your home. We don't have the money for that. But if you need, you know, windows, doors, some roofing, you know, new appliances, that sort of thing, that we can help with. People started replying to it. We went to the first person's house, which is in a town called Dehachi, which is just north of Kharkiv. And I think they were so, you know, it was myself and my colleague, and I think they were so confused by us turning up and saying all their windows were blown out. And we were like, well, yes, we can repair your windows, but we don't know how. And so how would you suggest that we should do it?
I'm here with all these good intentions. We're come to be your saviors here. Yeah. Can you help us help you? I don't know how to do it, but yeah. Awesome.
And they kind of looked very confused, and they said, okay, well, there's a window shop in town. Should we go to it? And we said, yeah. And so we went to this like shop, kind of a window kind of contractor. And so we went to it and we said, you know, how much would it be to provide a window? And they gave us a quote, and we went to a couple of other ones and they gave us a quote. We decided to go back to the first one, and just ordered them and got them installed. And it was the most kind of serendipitous thing because the woman who runs this shop, this contractor, Victoria, is still our main contractor. She heads up all our teams in every village. She's a kind of complete kind of hero. She's completely amazing. Kind of late middle-aged Ukrainian woman who's got just like all these teams of young Ukrainian men who she drives around to different villages to install windows, and is just non-stop calling me 5 times a day with updates. She's incredible.
And I wonder if that gives her a sense of purpose as well, this added.
I think so, yeah. And that's very much our logic with it. You know, we don't take on foreign volunteers because partly because of a safety aspect that, you know, as a UK registered charity, we can't take on the risk of having foreign volunteers coming that close to the Russian border, coming to places where there is regular shelling. We do not have like the legal infrastructure to deal with that. But actually more than that, it's because for the way I see it, reconstruction means more than just the physical rebuilding of houses. It's the rebuilding of a community. And part of that is financial support because these villages are so impoverished since the war. You know, their businesses are all shut down, people are unemployed, and, you know, that's what's causing real fragmentation of these societies. And so it's putting some money back into them. It's just paying some people in the village to do work, which is so vital at this point. But it's also about, as you were saying, kind of giving people a sense of purpose, and having people who've had to watch their home, their community be destroyed, take an active role in the repair of that community. And I think especially for a lot of young men who aren't in the army for whatever reason, it can be a very emasculating experience, especially if they're living that close to the front line. They see a lot of soldiers driving through every day. They are not in the army because they have a disability, or they have lots of children, or they just don't want to be, or whatever reason. No, they don't want to be and they haven't been called up. But giving them a feeling that they are still taking part in the war effort.
That's
But, they might not
fascinating.
be able to go to the front line, but they can install a window for the grandma who lives next door to them and keep her warm and alive through the winter. That's giving them something, and I think that's so important.
I love the phrase you just used, repair the community, because it goes back to what you said before, which is, I know I find that so powerful, which is, I can, it's almost like I can give a man a fish, but teaching him to fish, feeds him for a day, teaching him to fish, whatever. The idea is that, we can keep giving out food, but actually that's not positive. It's a sticking plaster. Although this is still a sticking plaster, there's something regenerative about it. There's something like you are, as you say, you're repairing people's houses, but in that sense, in a very real sense, you're repairing their communities, because it allows them to live, to flourish, and to interact. And then there are all these connections that people are making between each other through the work that you do, I'm sure. Would that be fair?
I hope so, yeah. And I think part of it is, in a very literal sense, in terms of a teaching to fish analogy, that, Victoria, this wonderful contractor we have, will also if she meets a young guy in the village who's, developing a problem with alcohol or has got very depressed, she will then kind of pick him up and train him to install a window or to measure up a door frame. And so she actually is, and we haven't asked her to do that. I love that she's doing it, and I love that she's using the projects that we give her as an excuse to do it, and that we get to pay these people then to work. But it does feel like such an essential part of it, and it is the part of it that I'm really most proud of. The homes we've repaired are amazing, and it's wonderful to go around and see them, but also knowing that we've given people back some autonomy, and we've given, it's very easy as foreign charity workers to step in and feel like best. And I really don't feel like this in this case. I don't know anything about home repairs or reconstruction. Like, this is not, I do now, but I'm not an expert in this at all. I'm not an architect. I can't do DIY. This is like, my skill is that I speak Russian and Ukrainian, and that I'm pretty good at fundraising. And that is what I can do and what I can offer to this situation. And so being able to take other people's skills and being able to send to communities in this rebuilding is so important. And send to their desires as well, so that, like, the villages that are being rebuilt in the image of what people want it to look like. It's not my idea of what this home should look like. It's the homeowner's idea of what it should look like. Within, obviously, if someone says, "Can you build me a spiral?"
I want a jacuzzi, and not too sure that.
But, like, within reason, it's saying, you lead the way. What do you think is most important? We have the boundaries that we set. We have a cost limit per house for the most part and stuff like that. But within that, what is most valuable to you?
Yeah. Sorry, there's just some really good questions coming in, and I am just telling people I'm storing up those questions, to ask you later. So it's interesting you talk about the serendipity of this woman who helps you out, who's the first contractor you went to, because she seems really, really quite crucial. And like, if it had been someone else, like the whole story that you might be telling could be entirely different. Isn't that funny how there are these moments in time that can define, obviously, how everything like plays out. And I think that's incredible. And she sounds like,
it's completely amazing. And I feel so lucky, and also that I have a friend, and that I never thought that my best friend would be a 6-year-old woman in a village in eastern Ukraine, but she really is. I talk to her more than any of my other friends.
Brilliant.
It's great. But
So it is the other question, and I'm going to go back to actually to the psychology we were talking about earlier. Are you a very morally driven person? I assume the answer is yes, because anyone that says I was interested in environmentalism, usually like that's a trigger for me, like a good trigger for understanding that someone, you know, cares a lot about things that are bigger than them rather than cares about stuff that's directly to do with them. And usually you can tell that that person's going to be quite morally active. Are you a very driven person then? Because like, what is it that took you? Again, it's a kind of question I asked earlier. What is it that actually took you out to them? What is it that when you put that appeal to other people, who were the sorts of people that came out to answer your call compared to the ones that didn't?
yeah, I guess, yeah, I definitely have always been quite driven. I was always quite involved in activism. I always wanted to be able to help with like the refugee crisis in the Mediterranean. I remember there being a point where I really regretted learning Russian and not Arabic, because I thought if I'd learned Arabic, maybe I could be useful in a refugee crisis. So you should really be careful what you wish for. But I was definitely motivated in that way, and so I didn't really question that I go out. I definitely didn't think that it would have taken over my life in the way that it has, but going out and helping in some way, especially at the start with the refugee crisis, was always just seemed obvious to me as the thing to do.
Fascinating.
I think the other people who came out, some of them also had backgrounds in activism, which I guess made it a logical step. I think a lot of us, to be honest, were driven by guilt as well. It was also, you know, people who had spent their careers studying Russia, had always denied that this could happen, and
Wow.
who, like me, just felt like they had to do something to kind of make up for the fact that we'd spent so much time in Russia and that we'd sort of defended Russia. And I think that definitely motivated a lot of people who come out at the start as well.
What are your, and sorry, we're kind of going around houses here because again, I could talk to you for about 5 hours, but I won't. Um, what are your opinions about Russia now?
Mm.
Like your genuine idea, and do you separate Russia from Russians? Do you separate Putin from Russia? Like, what are your general feelings?
Um, I think it's very. I don't feel much towards Russia. I mean, I feel a lot of anger. I feel a lot of hatred. I choose not to focus on it. I don't think it's productive for me.
Right,
I care about Ukraine. I want to help Ukraine. I can't think too much about Russia. It's not a good way to use my time. I found out today that I had been kind of semi-doxed on a far-right Russian fascist Telegram channel, which I thought was I mean, slightly disturbing, but also just so funny that, you know, if you told me 2.5 years ago that that would have been the case, I wouldn't have believed you. But I guess my point with that is that I know that even if I wanted to, I couldn't go back to Russia. It wouldn't be safe for me to go to Russia anymore. Um, I wouldn't want to anyway because I no longer feel any connection with that country. I think most Russians are either apathetic or pro-war, and I don't want to be around them. I have
mm,
also, at the same time, I have Russian friends who work very, very hard to support Ukraine constantly, and
really,
they're incredibly brave people, including people in Russia who are helping to evacuate people from occupied territory, and they're, you know, some of the bravest people I know, but they are very much the minority. Um,
yeah,
so I separate Russians from Russia in those cases, but they would also separate themselves from Russia. I think that's the key distinction, that they also don't
fascinating.
see themselves in Russia anymore. And they're mostly still there in order to help Ukrainians, and I really respect that.
Yeah,
But
that, I mean, as you say, that is incredibly brave. I mean, the problem with Russia is the internal security services are more numerous than the armed services,
yeah,
the armed forces there, and just to try and do anything that's critical to the regime, to try and do everything that's kind of morally upstanding to support any kind of oppressed set of people in Russia, which is kind of most non-normative people.
yeah,
Like, you are putting yourself on the line,
yeah.
and trouble is around the corner. Do you want to just show us where your most of your work is? Sorry, just get the right one
Yes.
there. So here is. I'm just going to
Okay,
zoom
so
out.
if
So
we go to
Kharkiv is over here. This is the oblast, and there's the
mm.
city.
So if we go to this into the city, and then okay, so just above the city you see Dahachi, which
It
is
will come.
just
Yep, yep,
yeah.
yeah.
So from Dahachi, going up that road past Slatina, right up to the border, we work in all the villages up that road, up to the border. So Kazachalopin, we don't do repairs in. It's under too much shelling, but we have done some other support there with generators and stuff, and I do hope that we'll be able. We get a lot of requests there for repairs, but just can't do them because it's too dangerous. The road next to it with Ruskalozova up to Hoptivka, we also work on that road, all the villages there. Again, up to Hoptivka, which is also under constant shelling, but we have provided them with some energy support, but not in a position to provide home repairs there yet.
That's
Um,
incredible. I mean, because we think so much about over here because that's closer to where
mm,
the actual the front lines are now. But of course,
yeah,
back when Kharkiv was surrounded, it was largely surrounded. So all of this would have
yeah,
been, occupied, and there would have been, things flying through the sky and through the air and into ground and into buildings all around here. So yeah, there's a lot
yeah.
of, I assume, a lot of destruction here.
No, I mean a lot, and I mean up to 90% destruction in a lot of the villages, and
Really?
it's we also work on that next one across as well. Sirkuni, Ruskitishki. That's what we're doing in order this week, and so it's kind of those three main roads up to the border, and the one with Zolochev as well. We were working in, but it's become too unstable there again.
So all of these four there,
Yeah,
basically this one,
yeah,
this one, this one, and this one, with the concentration on this one.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
but I think these villages get very forgotten even within the oblast because all the attention goes towards the east of the oblast, which is understandable because it's where most of the fighting still is. But technically, a lot of these villages are still considered frontline villages because the whole border is considered the front line.
And is
And
it still? I mean, you've already mentioned this, but is it still that active? Is there still just
along
shelling?
that border, yeah, along that border, it's completely constant. Just so even if you're in the villages kind of 20 kilometers away, you just hear booms constantly.
And do people
Um,
still live in those very border villages then?
yeah, people live. I've never been to a village where there's no one. It's mostly very elderly people still there, and it's not many, but there are still people in every village, which is kind of
Yeah, this
unthinkable.
is Yeah, this is something I've talked quite a lot about with the people who listen, like my team there. But in terms of some of the other charity workers I've spoken to, so Base.ua, who do a lot of sort of evacuation work on the front
Mm,
line, and they were talking about, often people talk about how the last people left are your older, more vulnerable, mental health, physical
mm,
health. No family, no connections, no hope of relocating, don't know anyone else, and so therefore, it's understandable that they're like, well, the only hope I've got is here with my house. And
yeah.
then if that house is then destroyed, that's where angels like yourself pop along and say, hey, let's put that right.
But I guess it's even more than that. I mean, that is definitely very true. And then there are two other points I'd like to make on it. One of which is how many people are going back to these villages.
Hmm.
Even the ones which are, so for example, Kazachalopin, which is on the main road we work on right at the top. Population of Kazachalopin's like doubled in the last 6 months. It gets shelled about 20 times a day. Its hospital was hit the other day. There are people still dying there most days, or at least being injured. And people are going back because they can't afford to keep living in Europe. They can't afford rent in other parts of Ukraine. They're accepting that the war is going to go on for a really long time and have decided that they're going to take their chances. I feel absolutely desperately sorry for the local administration, because obviously more people moving back puts them at a greater risk. It means that they have to spend more time in the village. This village is about 4 kilometers from the Russian border. It's incredibly close. It's not good for anyone to be there, but there's nothing you can do, and you can understand that if people can't afford to keep living somewhere else, they don't have much choice. The other thing, in terms of people staying in frontline areas, is that people get very, it's incredibly traumatic, and when people become traumatized, they can't think straight. And so people make very irrational decisions, including to stay in these places, and it's a completely self-perpetuating cycle, where the longer people stay in these villages, the less able they are psychologically to live away from shelling. And I found this just working in these villages, and in Kharkiv, I was there 9 months pretty solidly, and leaving was incredibly difficult. Being back even somewhere slightly further away from the front line in Ukraine slightly did my head in. I didn't know how to cope with it. I didn't know how to.
In what way?
Sorry?
In what way? That's fascinating.
I think in the way that you constantly kind of wait to hear shelling, it becomes very normal to you. I found myself incredibly irritated with everyone I spoke to, not able to really communicate with people anymore. This was pretty mild. Kharkiv city was still under pretty, reasonably bad time, but not that bad. And the villages I was in, again, were having a pretty bad time, but they weren't frontline. It wasn't ground zero. And the people I've spoken to who are in ground zero and can't leave, I'm just said that they don't know how to speak to people anymore. They wouldn't know how to go into a shop anymore. They are so jumpy. It's a lot easier, in a way. If you think you've heard an explosion, it's kind of a lot easier if that explosion is an explosion to if it isn't an explosion, when you get to the state of trauma that these people are in, because they're so used to it, because they're on such a high level of adrenaline all the time. And so, a lot of these villages, I was very struck, one of these villages on the border, Malipur Hadi, where I was a few weeks ago. I went there to get a list of houses which needed windows, and I asked them if they could also give me a list of their other main needs for winter, because they still don't have electricity or internet or anything there. And the head of the village said their main need was a therapist, because the residents left behind were so traumatized. And she said that they needed a therapist who would come to the village, because the residents were too scared to go to Kharkiv, which is like a 35-minute drive. It's not far away. And they just didn't want to leave that particular village. They were scared that if they left the village would be occupied again. Their trauma, the PTSD they're living with is so extreme. It was impossible. I couldn't find a therapist for them. If any of your viewers know of any therapists in Kharkiv who are willing to travel to kind of 3 kilometers from the border and do sessions, we're still looking.
Well, that's really interesting. I was going to ask another question on the back of that, but it's a good time to mention. So I've got someone who's been on a few of my live streams himself. He lives in Australia at the moment. He's a British Australian who was living in Kharkiv up until the beginning of the war, and then evacuated via Romania, and then went back to live in Australia with his Ukrainian wife and son. And now I think their father-in-law is just out there visiting. Speaking to my father-in-law, a lot of people feel betrayed in Ukraine. They will win, but a lot of people won't live to see it, he says. So that was something else he said. Something he's also said on the end of that. But there were also questions about whether there is some kind. Here it is. So Brian then says, just curious, in World War II, Churchill started a national property insurance scheme to have everyone contribute to the cost of dwellings bond. Does Ukraine have an insurance scheme to help these people? So how how do you interact with the authorities, and what responsibilities do the authorities have? Or is it just the fact that there's so much that they can't possibly begin to try and cope with all of the destroyed buildings?
Yeah, so there was no government support in the Kharkiv region. I believe there was some in the Kiev and Chernihiv regions, but there was nothing in the Kharkiv region until this autumn. And then A online scheme was started. It's actually, I believe, funded by USAID. So USAID clearly released some funds to support the reconstruction process. In a way, the scheme is very successful and it is paying for repairs for a lot of people. It has an upper limit and a lot of people need repairs beyond that. It's also very bureaucracy heavy. And that bureaucracy means that a lot of people lose their eligibility for it. So you basically, the way it works is you can only apply for it if you are the deed holder for the house. But a lot of people in Ukraine aren't the deed holders for their houses because their houses have been in their families for several years, because things got lost at the end of the Soviet Union, or because their partners were the deed holders and their partners have died, especially during the war. And so a lot of women don't have the deed to their house because it was their husband who had the deed to their house and he has died in the war. And it costs a lot of money to change the deed. And it also takes, I think, 13 months.
Wow.
And so I'm not 100% sure about 13-month figure is correct, but it's a long time. And I believe it's about that. And so if you're eligible for this scheme, then it's very good. It's very helpful. But when the scheme started, I thought, our work is done. Great. Like, can go home.
Yeah.
But actually, there are still thousands and thousands of people who aren't eligible for it. And I hope that the scheme improves and that, they'll work out a way to make it work for more people. But the thing with a home repair is that it's urgent and we work on principle only with people currently living in their homes. And if someone is currently living in their homes right now, it's like -10 degrees there, thick snow.
Yeah.
They can't afford to wait until the scheme becomes eligible for them in about a year's time.
Yeah.
But the fact that it started is really good. The fact that a lot of people are eligible and they are getting money and it is being effective is amazing.
Do you cannibalize much out of the old buildings and ones that have been properly destroyed?
Mm.
Can that help
Yeah.
you at all?
Yeah, so we don't a lot, but it's very good in terms of roofing. So a lot of old buildings in Ukraine are built with these roof tiles which have, I think, like 8 waves. I mean, like 8 kind of waves in the tile, if you can envision that. Whereas the new ones have 12, and you can't buy the 8-wave ones anymore. And so if someone's had like one tile destroyed, you can't buy one tile to replace it, and so you'd have to redo a whole roof. But what's a lot easier is going to their neighbor whose house might have been completely destroyed but has one whole tile, and then just paying for it to be installed. And so we do that, and we do it with bricks as well. And so it can, when we don't do it constantly, but it is a very effective way to save money, especially when there are buildings where you have to replace the entire. Well, we collaborated on a hospital, on a medical clinic with a Ukrainian organization. They were doing the roof and we were doing the windows. And they decided to repair the whole roof. And so they gave us all the roofing tiles, and we were then
Yeah.
able to distribute those roofing tiles around. And so it worked very well.
Yeah, so actually, Matt says it took 6 months to change the deed on
Mm.
my aunt-in-law's house, but we had all the paperwork, so everything was absolutely tickety boo, and it still took
Yeah.
6 months. So I imagine a lot longer if you don't have all that stuff. So with regard to HARPP, then I'm going to go back to your website.
Mm.
Are there any particular stories that you think really strike you as difficult, challenging, or uplifting, or ones that are worthy of particular note?
Yeah. So I would say if we go up a bit to, okay, so this one here, the one with the 2 old women in front of their window. So that's Vera. She's the woman in the middle, and next to her is Sveta, who's her neighbor. Sveta actually took us to Vera because Vera had no way of contacting us. We now work through local administration. They give us lists, and we just check on them and make sure that they're legit, but they always are. But at that point, we were working through individual requests still, and Vera had no way of contacting us because she only had a brick phone and there was no phone signal, and so it was just a bit of a mess. So we went and we met her, and she was wonderful, and she was living in this apartment. She was the only person left in her apartment block. All her windows were completely smashed out. It was absolutely freezing. And I just remember her saying to me that she had been born under occupation, and because she'd been born under the German occupation of Kharkiv, and she had been so convinced that she was also going to die under occupation when they were living under it, and she still couldn't quite believe that she wasn't going to. She still thought they might come back and she might still die under occupation. And it was just completely broke me, really. It was absolutely horrendous. But we did all her windows. It was £1,000, which at that point was the most we'd spent on anyone. Definitely isn't anymore, but at that point felt like a very big investment. And when I went to see her in the summer, and some of her neighbours have moved back as well, which is really nice because she's got some company, and we've done their windows as well now. And so, really good that she's not alone, has people to look after her. Because she's in her late 80s, and living like that is not, it's not a way for anyone to. Yeah.
And any other particular anecdotes?
If you go up, then onto that one, the blue one, the one which is half November, December last year. Down a bit.
Oh, this one.
And then it's the sixth picture in that one. Yeah, if you just scroll through them, you should be able to go through. Yeah.
Oops. Oh, okay. Oops.
That's okay. It should just take you to the photo.
That's all right. I'll go here.
Yeah, so this woman, this is Helena. She's also in Zlatana. We were also taken to her by her neighbour. Before the war, she lived with her husband in this little house, and also their dog Jack. Her husband died while they were under shelling. He died from a heart attack because the shelling was so intense, which is quite a common story. She, at that point, because the village was front line, they weren't able to get an ambulance to come and get him. And so he, after his heart attack, he lay dying for 3 days, with her unable to get any help. When he finally died, she had to bury him in her garden. And he's still there, because again, it comes back to this bureaucracy that she can't kind of prove when his death was, and there are all these complexities of getting a death certificate, and so he's just still in her garden. She was living in this house again with no windows. The gas pipes going to her house had also been destroyed. And so we repaired all her windows. We also bought her a wood boiler, and provided her with wood for last winter. Thankfully, this winter, the local authority has been able to get funding to provide wood for people themselves. But last winter, they weren't able to do that. And so we were sending out a lot of trucks of wood to these villages. But I mean, her story, yes, completely horrific, and just horrific because it's so. She's like the fourth woman I met whose husband was buried in their garden. It's just so
incredible. And you were saying elsewhere with her that her husband won't be included on the war death stats.
Yeah, because he didn't technically, like, there's no way to prove that he had a heart attack because of a shelling. That's like, he clearly did, but there's no way to prove that. And so I find it so frustrating when, obviously the statistics about deaths in Ukraine are inaccurate anyway, and we all know that. We all know that they don't include Mariupol, they don't include Bakhmut, they don't include Severodonetsk, but they also don't include a lot of people who died from war-related causes, which aren't as simple as your house being directly hit. And I've also met and did some work with one woman in a village called Ruski who worked in the administration, whose granddaughter died of a stroke under shelling, 7-year-old. And they can't prove that was because of a shelling. But why does a 7-year-old have a stroke? Why does that?
Yeah, that's not a normal thing. Yeah.
What can cause that?
I was tempted to ask you, the both ends of the spectrum. What's your bleakest kind of story? But I guess I don't know, that might be too difficult. Maybe people want to be uplifted more. So maybe it's better to ask what's your most uplifting story that you think has meant the most to you?
Oh, what is? I mean, I would say the work, being able to work with Victoria, with our contractor, and watching how she has taken this opportunity to form these communities in different villages, to bring together men who otherwise might have gone down very dark paths, and to, utilize what we can provide her in terms of funding to create something really amazing. That has been so wonderful to watch, and I'm so proud to have been a part of that.
I mean,
I
I know very little about what you do, but from just the little snippets you say, if you don't pat yourself on the back, then I will. Like, I imagine if it wasn't for you guys existing, right? If Wordsworth didn't exist, and you hadn't helped get this thing up, you're the director of HARPP, right? If that HARPP didn't exist, then that woman wouldn't be doing her things, and then all these houses wouldn't have X, Y, and Z. But it's not just that fixing, it's, as I say, repairing communities. It's the connections that are being made. And if you think of, you could map out all those connections of people that have been doing those things as a result of what you guys have done in that area, and all those connections and all that, like, and if each connection you could put like a moral value or a happiness value on, you could see like a heat map of this Kharkiv area where you guys had that positive impact. That is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really lovely way to put it. Thank you. But yeah, I mean, it has been amazing, and it's been so amazing to be let into these communities in the way I have as well, I guess. That,
I
I
wanted
have
to
so
ask you
many
about that
friends.
actually. So, sorry, I'm interrupting you. Just carry
No,
on.
no, cool. No, I was just saying that I have so many friends in them now, being able to, when I go to them, it's difficult to get anything done because I'm just going into every house and having dinner with people and doing shots with people, and it's lovely. It's so nice to feel part of these spaces, especially the villages closer to the border, which were under occupation for the longest. People are very suspicious in a lot of ways, and don't necessarily want to let people in, and it can take a while to kind of build the trust of the local administration, of the residents, and it's really wonderful to have done that, and to feel in some way part of these communities in some small way, and to kind of know that I kind of have a home there is very nice. Like, to people always saying like, "Oh, just stay the night." It's like, it's okay. I'm not you don't have any windows, but it's so nice that you're offering.
So, given that you are a British female,
Mm,
Russian speaker, but then Ukrainian, uh, vegetarian,
mm.
coming in to do the work you've done, what have been those kind of cultural challenges that you've come up against that have, oh, that's interesting, or oh, that's difficult?
Yeah. Um, I think definitely the Russian speaking was always fine because this is still a very Russian speaking area. I
Yeah.
do speak Ukrainian now, but I still, when I'm there, end up speaking mostly Russian, or Sujik, which is like the Russian Ukrainian mix. It has meant like learning Ukrainian in this area has meant that I speak such a weird Ukrainian, it's like exclusively Ukrainian of old women in rural eastern Ukraine and me. Um, but that's fine. There'll be time after the war to kind of perfect it. Um, but I'd say being the main thing has been being a woman. Definitely there is, especially in these rural areas, there's sort of surprise at my presence. There is, especially if I'm there by myself, then people have nowhere else to turn to, and so they have to work with me. But if I come with a guy, even if I'm just coming with a guy who's driving me because I don't have a car at that moment. So like there was a point where I had some guy driving me when I was last there. He didn't know anything about what we were doing. He didn't know anything about the rebuilding. He was just a friend who had driven me there, as a favor. And every single question was addressed to him, and I would answer it. And the person who would ask it would look at me with a lot of confusion and then turn back to him and answer it again. And that's frustrating, and at the start, I definitely did get quite offended by it and quite hurt by it, but I don't anymore. Like, I just take it as it is, and It has got a lot better, I think, as well, because people kind of know who I am more in these areas. Because we work in kind of the same 16 villages.
Yeah.
You get to know people, and people know who the weird English girl is. And
And you've said that you don't shake hands either anymore.
yeah, that people just never. Yeah, people would always, if I was with a guy, they'd go and shake the guy's hand, and then I would put my hand out to shake, and these old men would look at me with absolute horror, but they might have to shake my hand. And so I stopped doing that, which kind of took a moment, and I was very stubborn for a while and would kind of insist that they shook my hand. I was like, okay, no, like it's really not the time to be trying to make some kind of feminist statement. It's okay. No,
Come on,
shake my
guys,
hand.
this is the time for moral progressiveness here. Like, come on. No? Okay. How about a new window? No, yeah.
Yeah.
So, interesting. And how's vegetarian pork?
Yeah, I mean, the vegetarianism doesn't go so well there. I think partly because they have in Ukraine, salo, which is like the fat, which is like a Ukrainian delicacy. And every single person I meet who offers me salo and I say, no, I'm vegetarian, makes the same joke, which is that no, salo isn't meat because it's not in the meat aisle of the supermarket, it's in the salo aisle. Which is just not a funny joke, doesn't work. It's made to me multiple times a day there. And yeah, there's not much belief that this is meat. Also, not much belief that chicken is meat. Been offered a lot of vegetarian soups and found large chunks of chicken in them. But again, that's fine. I don't mind that much.
It's all part of the experience.
Yeah,
And Matt says women don't shake hands in Ukraine. I've
yeah,
tried many a time, and the look of shock was always priceless.
yeah. And
So
I'm glad
yeah,
that it's happened the other way around for someone. It's not just kind of. I know, but there's
yeah,
like a guy who's tried to experience that the other way. But yeah,
yeah.
no, people. It is the shock. It's not even just like a quiet rejection. It's like real shock and terror. And I once felt very bad when I met a soldier at a friend's warehouse, and they were coming to collect some equipment, and they'd just come from the front. It was when Kharkiv was surrounded. They were clearly so stressed and having a terrible time being on the front line, and they'd just driven in, I think, to get some first aid kits. And I think I just made his day so much worse by going up to him and like, "Hi, I'm Ada," and offering him my hand. I was like, "Oh God, I really didn't need to do this, did I? You really didn't need this today."
Brilliant. So it's now winter time.
Mm.
How has that changed things for you? I know you've experienced one already in what you do, but how does that make things ever more challenging?
I mean, last winter was very difficult, mostly because of the shelling of the infrastructure, which had massive delays on all our orders because factories couldn't operate properly. Thank God, so far this winter that hasn't been the case, and I hope it doesn't become the case. But this winter is a lot colder, and it's a lot snowier, and there are a lot of houses where we should be doing work which aren't accessible. It's cars just can't get down those roads. And so we're having to pause on the repairs for them, which is obviously completely counterintuitive because if it snows very deep, then surely it's time that you most need to go and do it.
Yeah.
And our workers are amazing, and where possible, we'll just carry this stuff by hand or take wheelbarrows with it. But there are a couple of cases where it just isn't possible, where the snow makes it completely unfeasible. And so, I mean, I'm hoping that there'll be a thaw in the next couple of weeks and I'll be able to go, even if it does snow again later.
And have you experienced people dying, but in the areas you're working because of the cold and because of the situation of having a house that isn't functioning properly?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it very much is something which happens. And again, those aren't deaths which are going to be considered deaths as a result of the war. Those aren't going
Yeah.
to be official
Yeah,
deaths.
it's these grey lines of demarcation. Don't get me talking philosophy because I can talk to you
Yeah.
about the difficulty of demarcating anything that exists on the spectrum. But that's another whole lot. Yeah, that's terribly sad. And I guess when you are existing in communities like that and becoming part of those communities, and I imagine things hit home all the more when you are
Yeah.
seeing those houses and knowing those people.
Yeah. And I think it's what you were saying earlier about what the other volunteers you were speaking to said about the fact like these are mostly very elderly people there. It's the
Mm,
people who are least able to survive these extreme
mm.
temperatures are the ones who are being forced to at this point.
And how did you go about raising money at the beginning, and
Mm.
how has that how's it become more challenging given, war fatigue or just general Ukraine fatigue as people, I know from my own viewing figures that I'm probably getting half the viewers I got maybe 6 months ago, 8 months ago or something. And so, and I'm doing absolutely nothing different. And yeah, people are going to get bored of me. I don't blame them. But the idea is that, there are other things in life. There are other things in the news cycles that will take people's attention away, and yet there are still those needs for those people, and that doesn't go away. So how's that changed the work you do?
Yeah, I mean, at the start of the war, when I was first on the Polish border, it was completely amazing. I could do an Instagram post saying that I needed, £5,000 for plane tickets that day, and I would raise it in 10 minutes. People would just send it to my bank card. It was incredible. That's obviously not the case anymore. The first year, we received pretty much entirely individual donations, and they just added up a lot. We then got a big donation from Pink Floyd, which was amazing and bizarre, and also a donation from the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and they were helpful and enabled us to do a lot of work. But we don't hold money. Like, we hold a little bit just in case of emergencies, but like we spend what we have, because why should anyone be living without windows while we have money in our bank account? It just it doesn't make sense. So if we get money, we spend it as soon as we are able to spend it. And so, but at the moment it has gone back to individual donations, which I really like. I really like it as a way to do it. I'm sure that there'll be a point where I'll be frantically applying for grants. It hasn't happened so far. So far, it has been individual support. I guess it's less in terms of number of people than it was at the start. But I think the people who have stuck with us this far are incredibly committed and now give more.
Right.
I think because we've been so grassroots, because we have a newsletter which people can subscribe to, and you kind of see constantly what we're doing and you can keep up to date with it so easily, that has appealed to people and has meant that people have given a lot very consistently. And that's really nice.
And I would say, I mean, it's a shame in a sense that myself and actually Greg, who is, I said to you in the green room, if you like, that there's a bunch of us YouTubers who got together to do some fundraising, and Greg is one of them is over in Ukraine at the moment. Or Greg is on the live stream listening to you. I presume he's still there, and so he's over in Khmelnytsky, I think, just getting some more stuff together before going back to the front line area. So we've just done a whole load of fundraising for that, but what you do is I mean, equally, there's no kind of help is help, and everyone needs help in all these different ways, and it's hard to value any one help over another. But what you are doing seems absolutely fantastic, and I love those those interactions you are having and connections you're making locally, and the fact that you are using local people and you're inspiring them and motivating them to get up and work and have meaning and matter. And so the work you're doing just sounds absolutely phenomenal. And the fact that it's just come from essentially you deciding to go and help in Ukraine, originally help the refugees as they cross the border into Poland, and here you are all this time later with all the experiences you've had. It's phenomenal. Is it I mean, would you appreciate donations from viewers if they can? Obviously, I know it's a silly question, of course you would, but
yeah, I mean, if anything people are able to give, we're so grateful for. And it's honestly like a small amount can go a long way. The average cost for doing kind of light repairs to a home of like windows and doors is about £500, which isn't very much when you think that it can kind of permanently transform someone's life. And I do mean permanently, because we are very careful in the areas that we work, and we've never had a window broken. I'm constantly on war maps and making sure we're not working anywhere which has any active conflict and always in touch with local administration who say whether we should or shouldn't be working there. And so it's not a case that you're going to donate and then, you know, your money is going to go nowhere because in a week's time that will be destroyed. You know, the places we work in that northern part of the region because it is very, very well fortified. And we, in those border villages, we don't do repairs. We only do energy support because it's not worth it right now. And so your money will go where it's needed and make a long-term difference. And we can gift aid as well.
So donation. Okay, a couple of things there. So donations, by the way, if you do go through that, you can do like PayPal and different ways of paying there on the next. So if you do, but gift aid is something for British people, particularly where I think it's the similar sort of thing in America, but basically gift aid, it means that the government boosts donations by 25% if you donate, something like that.
Yeah, which makes a massive difference. And we can do via that kind of plug-in, we can take donations or via the bank account if you want to avoid fees, or we can do checks, or we can do Bitcoin, or any other cryptocurrency. And
that's so, you know, look how, I mean, goodness me, I don't even understand those words, but
no,
there you are.
Like,
you're down with the
I have
kids.
very kind friends who deal with that bit for me.
Right, fair enough. So have you experienced, so you've talked a little bit about that experience between the two worlds. I remember listening to one of your interviews on Ukraine, the latest podcast, where you talked about the resentment between rural areas and Kharkiv. Is that still the case?
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, it's even deeper than that. It's village to village. It's, you know, I work in the one village we work in, Slatina, is 70% destroyed. The village above it, Prodyanka, is 90% destroyed. Remember once a woman from Prodyanka chasing me down the street, shouting at me, saying, "Why are you helping the people in Slatina? They haven't suffered the way that we've suffered."
Wow. They're talking about in-group, out-group psychology, where everyone, like your in-group is just like, it's concentric circles. Like the people in Kharkiv might as well be Russian, those bastards.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it's all like it's, yeah. What are you doing helping my neighbor? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and I said this to a Ukrainian friend and they were absolutely horrified. And like, I can't believe you still help us, like when my countrymen are behaving so badly. And, you know, I'm not there to judge. You know, I don't know how I would deal with that situation if it came to my hometown. Like if we had to go through what they'd go through, who knows how you'd react and how you'd react towards your neighbors. And so, you know, I don't say this with any judgment, you know. It's just, it's a lot easier to be angry with the people you can see than it is to be angry with the whole of Russia.
Yes,
you know, it's a lot more achievable to fight against your neighbors than it does to fight against a foreign state. And so I don't, I worry about saying these things publicly because I worry that it gives a really bad impression of people, and I don't want it to do that. You know, it's not that people
no, of course not.
are ungrateful. It's people are just traumatized, and people are also just develop a sort of each for their own mentality, which comes with the fact that these villages, as I said, have been largely forgotten, and don't receive the same support as other places. And I think the way that the liberation happened last autumn, where the Kharkiv region was liberated and there was so much celebration around that, and a lot of aid came in, a lot of money came in, and then quite soon after, half of Kherson was liberated, and then direction moved to Kherson, which is, again, you know, don't begrudge people in Kherson for that. They definitely need as much support as they can get. But the way that we live in this kind of social media world where it's always like the latest thing to happen, these villages which were liberated just before that do just kind of get forgotten. And because they're not near Izium, they're not near where current fighting is in the Kharkiv region, that just adds to it. You don't see them in the news, and so people just assume that everything's fine there, and everything very much isn't.
Someone asking, have you thought about setting up Buy Me a Coffee, which is kind of like PayPal but slightly different, probably different fees and whatnot. That's another thing that I use Buy Me a Coffee, and it's a very good system of doing that. So it's just a thought, and it's really easy to put on social media as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna note that down. I will set one up and post it on Twitter and everything. Thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah, no, it's I would yeah, definitely second that. Have you ever looked like this?
Um, Vaguely, yeah, but I'm not very good at doing the kit stuff. I I'm a lot less good at it than I maybe should be. But I feel, yeah, it's my own insecurities that I don't want to go to a place where I'm surrounded by residents who have absolutely nothing and be talking to them in a flak jacket and helmet, because I feel like it automatically creates
Interesting.
a kind of divide there, which isn't one that I want to have. And it's what I really value about being able to speak the local languages, is that kind of breaks down some of that divide, that I can have a one-on-one conversation very easily, and I kind of want to hold on to that,
Mm,
which is maybe not something that my mum would like to hear particularly, but I
yeah.
find that people
How
actually,
have you? Sorry, carry on.
sorry,
Getting
no, I was
ahead
just
of
saying, I
myself.
think people do appreciate it about the way that we work, that it is very kind of holistic and all in this together. But that is probably not advisable. But is how I'm doing it.
So, does your mum think you're a cool lady? Like you mentioned your mum. What's your mum think about you?
Oh god, I think my mum has been amazingly supportive when this has been obviously incredibly difficult for her. Um, and but she's still super supportive, and I am constantly trying to be better at like being in touch more. And like, I'm getting there. It's very easy when you're in these places to become completely sucked into it. And it's very important not to do that, and to remember that like you do have family at home. And so
Mm. And that's why you're at home at the moment, isn't it?
yeah,
I guess.
yeah, yeah, completely. And you meet a lot of foreign volunteers in Ukraine who feel so, and I was like this for a while, like you feel so much guilt about leaving, because you feel guilt not being in the same situation as your Ukrainian friends, but you actually do have to. Sometimes you have to go and see your family. You have to be back. Also kind of slightly remember what you're there for. I'm there because I want to help Ukrainian families be able to stay together in their homes. And so sometimes I need to go back to my home and see my family to remember why that's important.
Yeah, I have similar, not similar at all, but things where if I make jokes on my videos and I'm like laughing and find something funny or just trying to be a bit of a douchebag or whatever, and I catch myself and go, what am I doing, laughing and enjoying myself when I'm talking
Mm,
about such serious issues like this, or maybe I'm having a glass of wine sometimes if I'm doing a late night live chat or something. I'm thinking,
mm.
is that appropriate? Because I'm talking about people who fight, and like it's this mental kind of gymnastics that goes on in these debates that I have it in my own head with regard to, like, you know, I always go back to, well, I can't do that because what about these people
Yeah.
in Ukraine? And that's kind of the similar with your good self there.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think it's something that exists in Ukraine as well, that there's, a lot of my friends, especially friends who work in the army, feel so guilty for having, a second of fun. And that's not everyone. A lot of people are living as normal lives as they can be, but the last time I saw a good friend in Kharkiv who volunteers pretty much, I mean, completely constantly for the army. We went and got a glass of wine, and I went to post a photo of her on Instagram. She's like, no, no, don't post that, because I don't want to, I
yeah.
feel like it's sensitive to like the people who I've seen today. But, it's, yeah, as someone's saying, guilt helps no one. And Ukrainians are fighting for something. They're fighting for people's
Yeah.
ability to enjoy things. And also, I have to say, my friends who are on the front line are some of the funniest people I know, and continue to be the
Well,
funniest people I know.
which is Cheryl's point here. Humor is a survival mechanism, especially in traumatic situations. Have you experienced that in terms of people on the front line, where you think you're in a desperate situation but still maintaining the ability to find humor in these situations?
Yeah, I mean, my one of my best friends in Ukraine just joined the army just before Christmas, and I've obviously been, completely really upset about it, and very, very worried and kind of constantly trying to be in touch. And he just sends me kind of funny little vlogs every day, just like doing kind of welcome to my crib, welcome to my luxury accommodation, showing me around his trench, and like is completely dealing with it with humor. And it also reminds me what a privilege it is for me to be able to kind of wallow in self-pity about the fact that my friend's in the army. He can't wallow in any self-pity because he's got to get up and do the job. And in order for him to get up and do the job, he needs to be in a good mood. And so he needs to make some jokes. And I need to make some jokes too, to make sure that I'm doing my bit to support him.
Nice. Yeah, I like that a lot. Pierre Dupont, who is one of these other guys who is also in Ukraine, although I think he's in France right now, but he works for Base.ua, which is another charity that works talking about, when I talked about evacuation, he's been working evacuating people from the front line, but also working in terms of there's a therapeutic art therapy for children over in Western Ukraine that they've set up and providing stuff again near the front line in the east. So an amazing job. And I've interviewed him, and he says, Ada, what a start. All sounds so familiar, especially those meetings and greetings. I'm leading a similar project with a girl from Donetsk, and we have those handshake moments too. So you're not the only one there.
We're relating to this.
And this is Mark Biscu. So Mark Biscu is a Ukrainian Canadian. I'm never quite sure which way around that should be. Who cares? It's all the same. Just a bit of a mix of everything. And he's a legend. He's over in Canada with his wife Olena, and they listen regularly to to what I do. They're great supporters, and obviously with family back over in Ukraine. Thank you for introducing Ada to us. Rebuilding after occupation is what my wife's family is still going through, along with the absolute fear of Russians returning. So they're much nearer to Kherson. They're down near the Dnipro River. Sernivka, I think. Yeah. Anyway, please split this donation and pass on our thanks to Ada and all that she does. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. That's really kind.
Very kind indeed. So I guess one of the last questions, unless any people have any super chat questions or anything that will go Ada's way, as questions for her. Corruption is this kind of big talking point that is very frequently amplified by pro-Kremlin voices, but it is an issue in Ukraine. However, is it the issue that many people claim it is? What's your experience or experience of non-experience of it been?
Yeah, I mean, as a kind of disclaimer, obviously what the work that I'm doing is very small scale, and so I don't, I can't comment on kind of the larger scale governmental issues, but I do work with a lot of local administrations, and I haven't experienced any corruption. I was very aware of it when I first started working there, which is why we would, taking lists ourselves and taking requests ourselves for home repairs and kind of doing everything ourselves, because I was nervous of working with local administrations. I was nervous that there would be issues with corruption, and after a few months had kind of become friends with the local administration and was like, okay, it's actually so much easier to just work with you guys, and genuinely haven't had any issues. The only thing we had was like in one village, the head of the village put his daughter, we have a policy that we only help people who are currently living in their homes as a first priority, and partly because we don't want to encourage people to move back to places which might not be safe. And he put his daughter, who wasn't currently living in the village, on kind of in the middle of the list of the first people to receive homes. And, we immediately spotted it and went and spoke to him. And, I guess that is low level corruption, but at the same time, I think it's a dad who wants to see his daughter again and thought maybe if she had a home repairs, then she might come back. And again, that we didn't do the repairs for her. But I don't think that it means that he's a bad person. This guy is also from Donetsk and has lost his home once. They thought they'd lost their home again when this village was occupied. It was then liberated. They got it back. Of course, he wants his family to be together. And so, yes, that's corruption. I don't think that is a particularly Ukrainian corruption. I think that's just being a parent. And other than that, we haven't experienced anything. We haven't experienced anything in terms of materials going missing. I've seen a lot of stuff that I would consider to be quite corrupt from large international British, American, European aid agencies, but I haven't seen any of it coming from the Ukrainian side.
Interesting, interesting. Ouch. Pointed comments there. Well, I said that's going to be last question. Last question. Do you work at all with other charities? Is there any kind of brotherly love, sisterly love going on with charities? And because some of the other people I've talked to, so Greg and again Pierre, I just mentioned, there is this kind of idea that especially with the smaller charities, you know, not so much your Oxfams and so on and so forth, but with the smaller charities, which there's an argument to say that's money better spent as well, and that goes much more to the local community and is much more effective. What are your thoughts about all of those ideas there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true. I would always say support small charities, support grassroots initiatives, support people where you can see where the money goes, where there aren't overheads. You know, I did not think that we would be doing the repair work in these villages for so long. You know, we always said that we would do it until the big charities came along and took over, and we're still not there. Don't really know where they are. Well, I do know where they are because they're all in the Grand Hotel in Lviv. But
ouch. Stop with these barbed comments. I think the head of International Red Cross is listening.
Big charities are doing some work. They're not doing work where we're doing. And it is very frustrating. And there was a very good report last year, which was published, I believe, by The Guardian, but it was done by various universities in the UK, which showed that the vast majority of money that had been donated to the Disaster Emergency Committee, which is like the consortium of charities in the UK, which the government recommended people donated to support Ukraine at the start of the war, had not got to Ukraine and had basically gone missing. And that doesn't happen when you support small charities. And so I would always say support small charities. We do collaborate with other small charities. We have one Ukrainian charity, which is run by some friends of mine called Levy Berech. And we work in most of the same villages as them. It's been a really successful collaboration. Just in terms, you know, actively working together on the repairs of houses, where, you know, we will do windows and doors and they will do roofs. And it also works quite well because they are Ukrainians. They get a lot of money from other Ukrainians. We get a lot of international money. And so we can kind of go to these different audiences and not feel like we're kind of pitching against each other for money. We both have our different audiences that we're working with, and then we can come together to support the same villages, which is great. Yeah, obviously always open to more collaboration and to especially talking to other charities who are doing reconstruction work on kind of the most effective ways to be doing this. Yeah.
Well, which kind of leads on to this. So, do you think you'll upscale at all? I mean, where do you see yourself going? I mean, do you want to be taken over by some larger charity, or do you know what I mean? Or do you want to become that larger charity, or
I don't want to be taken over because I don't think that large charities are particularly effective, and I think we are very effective. I like the idea of being able to become more self-sustainable. I really like the idea of being able to employ someone. My kind of aim for 2024 is to get some kind of core costs funding for the charity. You can apply for grants which just cover administrative costs. I don't take any administrative costs out of donations, but I would love to be able to employ someone in Kharkiv to be able to take over more of the admin work. Because, you know, I'm still doing this pretty much full time and not getting paid for it, and it's not that sustainable for that long. And, you know, I love doing it, but it would be great to be able to have someone else who could kind of be doing the accounts and responding to emails. And so I'm hoping that I'll be able to get some kind of core cost grants, and then I would love to be able to employ a Ukrainian, hopefully someone from Kharkiv, to be able to do that work. And that would kind of be the best of both worlds for me. Partly because it would be great to be able to employ someone from Kharkiv, again, doing that thing of putting money back into the economy, but also because it would be great to employ someone who really cares the same amount and would be able to put that in. And so that's where I hope it goes.
I love that everything you say. I mean, it's fabulous, right? But all of your answers are considered in what is best for those other people, and that's just wonderful. It's not just like what would be best for me personally or easier, but it's taking that into account, but as well as how will this benefit Kharkiv the most? How will this benefit the people whom I'm trying to help the most? And I think that's so important.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's stay a core message. It's all about these communities, and I do, I really love Kharkiv. I really love the villages around it. I really genuinely care about these places and do just want to do what's best for them at all times. And so I hope that HARPP keeps going for that sake, because I want to keep working with them, and I want these villages to thrive. It makes me so sad that these amazing places where these amazing people live, I have only seen in a state of so much destruction. And I would love people to come back to them, for them to be properly, fully rebuilt, and to be able to go back and see what life was like there before the war.
Yeah, wonderful. So Matt actually brought to tears. So yeah, I'm sure that his connections to Kharkiv, certainly that doesn't surprise me. Donate where you're not helping to fund a big international office and salaries somewhere. So yeah, really, really good stuff. Just a quick thank you on behalf of. Thank you from me to my viewers here. Thank you, Lawrence, for gifting some memberships. Such a legend, such a great supporter, and Lynn as well. Surprise, it's us from Arizona. Thank you so much for your love and support. And Brian Ivy, a legend as well, such a good supporter of the channel. So thank you, Brian. And it really does mean a lot. But what would mean far more, it would be if you guys keep HARPP in your consciousnesses, and even better would be to help out in donating to the work that Ada is tirelessly doing, and putting these people in a very different country to her own before herself in many ways, and that is what helps the world go around. So please help support HARPP as much as you can, and I will be reminding people of this. I'd like to do a list of worthy charities. People have asked me to do this before, and I think I'm going to compile a list of the people that I've been speaking to and working with in these kind of interviews, to say these guys are awesome, help them out, and you'd be at the top of that list. So awesome.
Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for people for coming and listening. It's incredibly nice, and it's really just heartwarming and encouraging to feel like people still care and still listen and still to hear about these places and this work, which is lovely.
Yeah, and is there any sort of final words that you would like to say, or any experiences we haven't talked about, anything we haven't touched on?
No, I mean, I think it's kind of preaching to the choir clearly in this environment, but just encouraging people to stick with Ukraine, especially now. The attacks over this past week in Kiev and also in Kharkiv have been absolutely horrific, and they've been a lot worse than previous attacks over the last year, at least in part seemingly because Ukraine is running out of air defense in a lot of ways. We don't have the Patriots that they had before. And so, especially international viewers, write to your representatives and encourage them to keep giving this stuff to Ukraine, because there's no other way for Ukraine to win, and Ukraine really has to win. And, I say that with a lot of personal care, because these communities I love so much are on the Russian border. And if Ukraine loses, then they're the next to go, they're the first to go. And so please keep supporting them in every way you can.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I couldn't have said it better myself. Those S-300 missiles that are consistently flown into Kharkiv are just bloody disgraceful. And, every day is another war crime. And yeah, but I love what you were saying about, do you know what? Thinking about Russia brings me down. So let's think about the positives of Ukraine, replace that negativity with Russia with the positivity of Ukraine. And I think that's a wonderful way of phrasing that. So brilliant.
No, very much so.
Well, look, I've absolutely loved this, and I feel that I could mine the quarry of your mind so much more for further nuggets of cultural and experiential gold. And I would love to speak to you again if that's at all possible, maybe
Yeah,
a few months down the line, to give us
yeah,
some updates on how things are going and projects you're working on.
yeah, definitely. I would love to come back. It's been great being on.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you very much. Stay on the line, Ada. Thank you very much to everybody in a live chat. And as I say, you know, please help out Ada and her work. Such a sterling effort in helping those people and rebuilding communities in Kharkiv. So if you have the wherewithal and the desire, please follow the links. I'll put the how to donate link in the live chat, but also in the description to the video below after I do this. And just thank you so much again. I love to Ada from New Zealand. Awesome interview.
Oh,
I'm looking forward to Ada setting up Buy Me a Coffee. So there you go. You've got at least one donation from Buy Me a Coffee.
Perfect. We'll make sure to set one up tomorrow.
Awesome sauce. Okay, well, look, thank you, everyone. Take care, y'all, and I will speak to you, no doubt, far too much tomorrow. In the meantime, thanks to Ada. Stay on the line. Take care. Your rule.